Will you all join me in a prayer? Come, Spirit, come. Fall fresh upon us as we hear these ancient readings and listen for their call in our times. And guide us in our wrestlings of the biggest questions, O God, and help us to know you are here. Amen. Okay, friends, today, back by popular demand for a brief summer series, we're going to return to the spiritual wisdom of Mr. Rogers, the creator of Mr. Rogers' Neighborhood, as well as the host of almost 900 episodes of that show. Now, last summer, in the midst of all that was crazy in our nation, we all found some spiritual centering in Mr. Rogers' wisdom, and many of you asked that we return here again this summer. So here we are. Now, over the next few weeks, we'll look at how Mr. Rogers looked at some of the really challenging things that we're facing in our country right now. And today we're going to start with what Mr. Rogers taught about what it takes to be a neighbor. Now, Mr. Rogers envisioned a neighborhood as a place that should offer care and safety. He felt that it was a place that should offer growth and support and nurturing and wholeness. And that meant that he believed that being a good neighbor meant practicing things like radical kindness, empathy, and unconditional acceptance. Being a good neighbor for Mr. Rogers meant doing things like championing the inherent worth of every individual, actively listening to each other, and loving others just the way they are. Being a good neighbor wasn't theoretical for Mr. Rogers. There were several very, very actionable behaviors that went into being a good neighbor for him that I think we can all learn from and offer more into the world right now because the world desperately needs it. So I want to spend a little time with them, especially the ones that Mr. Rogers felt were really, really critical. Okay, so to begin with, Mr. Rogers felt that being a good neighbor meant recognizing that conflict was a part of being in community. For example, in one episode of Mr. Rogers' show, the Puppet King Friday, who was the monarch of this make-believe neighborhood, reacted quite poorly to some new neighbors by putting up a barbed wire fence. That actually happened on the show. And the neighborhood responded, not by retaliating, but instead from a place of peaceful concern. And the two sides were able to come to a solution that worked for both parties. Often the conflicts that arose in the neighborhoods on Mr. Rogers' shows came from the fact that the neighborhood was really diverse, and it required peaceful and clear communication, the sort of communication that Mr. Rogers modeled over and over to his audience. And when he modeled that sort of communication, he affirmed that people with different beliefs can coexist, and that conflict is being part of being a neighbor. And it is in responding to differences and conflict with respect and peace that makes us good neighbors. That's a critical one, so I'm going to say it again. It is in responding to differences with conflict, with respect and peace that makes us good neighbors. Now, the other critical component about conflict and neighboring that Mr. Rogers consistently taught and modeled, that it was critical to make heartfelt attempts to understand different opinions. And that's a hard one. That's a really hard one, especially right now. And it was critical to understand those different opinions before responding. Mr. Rogers felt that the very act of learning where others were coming from would help us respond with more care and compassion in our responses and in our relationships. In other words, we respond best when we try to understand where the other person is coming from, and we're better neighbors because of it. And in today's world of social media arguments, this spiritual wisdom is especially critical and especially needed. Also, being a good neighbor for Mr. Rogers meant consistently affirming that people have authentic value. Mr. Rogers closed every show by reminding the audience, "I like you just as you are." One of his central messages was that unconditional acceptance was critical for community. And offering unconditional acceptance was critical to being a good neighbor. And that was a really important message to send to kids then and now, who so very often feel like they're different or less than those around them. And honestly, how many of us need that affirmation as well? We all need to be affirmed that we are accepted just as we are. And it wasn't just affirmation and unconditional acceptance that was essential to being a good neighbor for Mr. Rogers. It was also respect. And Mr. Rogers didn't just talk about respect, he modeled respect. And he did it in many ways. For example, during a time when Black people weren't allowed to swim in the same pool as white people, Mr. Rogers used his platform to speak out against racial segregation. Mr. Rogers invited his series regular, Officer Clemens, played by a Black actor, to cool his feet alongside his in a kiddie pool. When Mr. Rogers did this, he reminded everyone watching that being a good neighbor meant leading with respect and value for the other. And at that time of racial segregation, Mr. Rogers' simple act of respect was an especially bold example of neighboring. Now, one of the other critical components of being a good neighbor for Mr. Rogers was both offering and accepting grace for making mistakes. He felt that making errors was a vital part of learning. He said, "The most important learning is the ability to accept and expect mistakes and deal with the disappointments that they bring." That means that being a good neighbor means giving ourselves permission and others permission to get it wrong. Permission to try again. When we do this, we learn to be less hard on ourselves and on others. And in doing that, we acknowledge we are enough as we are. And we accept each other as we are. And that is a powerful component of being a good neighbor. So accepting conflict, offering respect and unconditional acceptance and grace, those were all essential components to being a good neighbor for Mr. Rogers. But there was one component to being a good neighbor for Mr. Rogers that was perhaps the most essential of them all. Now, Mr. Rogers started each and every show by walking into his television show singing the song, "Won't You Be My Neighbor?" And he would take off his coat and he would change into his sneakers and he would welcome people into his neighborhood. And here are the words of that song. It's a beautiful day in this neighborhood, a beautiful day for a neighbor. Would you be mine? Could you be mine? It's a neighborly day in this beauty wood, a neighborly day for a beauty. Would you be mine? Could you be mine? I've always wanted to have a neighbor just like you. I've always wanted to live in a neighborhood with you. So let's make the most of this beautiful day. Since we're together, we might as well say, would you be mine? Could you be mine? Won't you be my neighbor? Won't you please, please, won't you be my neighbor? Mr. Rogers said this about that song. I suppose it's an invitation. It's an invitation for somebody to be close to you. I think that everybody longs to be loved and longs to know that he or she is lovable. And consequently, the greatest thing that we can do is to help somebody know that they're loved and capable of loving. At its core, that song was an invitation. It was an invitation to help someone know that they are both loved and that they are capable of loving. That was the essential kernel of being a good neighbor for Mr. Rogers. Affirming the belovedness of the other and making sure they knew that they were capable of the same. So my challenge to all of us this coming week is to draw on that spiritual wisdom and to be good neighbors in some small way. Accept conflict, offer respect or unconditional acceptance or grace, or invite somebody close to us and affirm their belovedness and make sure that they know that they are capable of the same. Imagine how the world would be if we were all that kind of neighbors. It would truly be a beautiful day in the neighborhood. May we all be good neighbors to all we meet. May it be so. Amen.